Hey everybody, KMO here, and I have been thinking about a tweet that I encountered this morning. Here, let's have a look. Cognitive Policy asks a question for all of you to consider. Would you walk away from the internet to fully participate in Earth regeneration? So before I get into this question and tell you my thoughts on it, I want to share some of the better comments that I encountered here in the comments section. Nell wrote, I dedicate my life to making the world a better place. Trouble is, our ideas of such are all different, and there's so many vectors. Who's to say a social worker isn't regenerating the earth any more than a permaculturalist? What has the internet got to do with it? And Gregory Landua, who I was not following on Twitter until today, but whom I have met in real life at the Eco-Village Training Center at the farm in Summertown, Tennessee, he writes, hot take from an anarchic, primitive, adjacent, reluctant, techno-eco-regenerate. We cannot achieve the social coordination needed for Earth regeneration without the internet or some form of peer-to-peer information technology infrastructure. Would I like to just walk away and plant trees and repair watersheds? Yes. Do I think that walking away will transform the energy flows in the right place for systemic transformation so that humans become a keystone species for planetary regeneration? No. Both and. And somebody whose handle I will not try to pronounce writes, I don't think we can fully participate in Earth regeneration if we aren't globally connected. Internet gives us the possibility to do so. Lu Yan Roloff writes, why not work on decentralized grids that help us do both? Harvest collective intelligence and best knowledge available, and be independent and safe at the same time. William writes, Joe, yes, it's a dilemma. My grown-up kids are raised in a digital and offline world, finding a balance. For me, internet is about connecting and scale. In the places where we work, farmers, ecologists, and indigenous people are sharing and learning together online. Amazing sessions. To which Joe responded, I fully internalized this paradox as well. We lived off-grid in a rainforest for 10 months with our daughter, and are now in the remote Andes of Colombia, and seek to use our hands to help landscapes regenerate. Yet my work is mostly online teaching, writing, and weaving people. Helen writes, unsure whether you mean personally or society as a whole, but no. The internet is the best way we currently have to find up-to-date information from different people and disciplines. We need it for developing and communicating sustainability solutions and new paradigms. And Fionawala writes, yes. More and more it feels like attention given to online work is attention that would have been better used tending to our small holding. Yet it is a very good source for information and inspiration. And Jim writes, yes, if that's what it took, but strikes me Earth impact on electronic communications is relatively modest versus coordination capacities. And Carrie writes, even in this, there's no a way in which to walk. Until consumer electronics become a sustainable prospect, which is yet to be so, our incremental, gradual tweaking faces the already apparent prospect of eventual forced stop. So there are more online, and I'll link to this tweet in the description for the video below. But for now, let me diverge into some of my own thoughts on this topic. The question is, would you walk away from the internet in order to fully participate in the regenerative project of, healing the biosphere? Or how did he put it? To fully participate in Earth regeneration. So, is the question asking, would abandoning the internet collectively better allow humanity to achieve this desired end? Or is he saying on an individual basis, can we as individuals be more effective if we completely divorce ourselves from this engine of time and attention suckage and actually focus on doing stuff with our hands and bodies and other people in the real world? And so I think I'm going to agree with the people who on a collective level say, no, the internet is too useful a tool in this project to abandon it. But I think on a personal level, on a practical level, starting tomorrow, all of my income comes from things that I create digitally and distribute online. So I would be hard-pressed to just walk away, just in the context of existing in this, economic structure in which I am embedded. I would have a very difficult time just walking away from the internet. It would mean going and getting a bullshit job. which, I've worked so long and hard to have a life that allows me to not go to a bullshit job every day. But just in terms of my quality of life, I mean, I have heard, and I obviously I cannot sample this mentality. It's too late, but I've heard that people who never learn to read and write, they have a much more vibrant experience of, the sensual world. And they are better able to learn languages easily, other than their first language. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but I don't really have the option of saying, okay, I'm going to go back to when I was a child and not learn to read and write. I mean, it's just not an option. But even if it were an option, I would be hard-pressed to get excited about it, just because so much of what I find valuable about, living in a human society is the information that I have gathered through text. I mean, before the internet, through books and magazines. But I can think of it maybe as analogous to the question of, would you be willing to cut off the ring finger on your non-dominant hand in order to more fully participate in regenerating the earth? Well, what would cutting off your ring finger on your non-dominant hand do? I mean, it would be painful. It would take an enormous act of will to do it, at least without, massive amounts of alcohol or anesthesia. But, it doesn't seem like it would serve any practical purpose. And, maybe walking away from the internet would be the same. It doesn't serve a practical purpose. It's more a demonstration of what you'd be willing to sacrifice in order to, sacrifice not in order to achieve a goal, but sacrifice in order to demonstrate how highly you hold a particular goal. It's a magical ritual, walking away from the internet or, maybe chewing off the ring finger in your non-dominant hand. I mean, why do I say ring finger on your non-dominant hand? Well, I think it's true for most people, but for me in particular, this finger is the one that has the least dexterity, the least ability to move independently of the others. And if I had to pick one to lose, that would be it. So, in terms of being able to function in the world, I really wouldn't be diminished much by the loss of this finger. But, I want to be whole. But let's think about it on a different level. Consumer electronics. One of the tweets I read said, consumer electronics right now, they are not environmentally benign. And I agree, they're certainly not. But I don't think it's the electronics themselves which are necessarily so harmful. It's the fact that they're ephemeral. They improve so quickly, or at least until recently, they improved so quickly that we were always discarding them and buying new ones. Or if you're like me, you don't discard them because there's information on them that you're not able to retrieve at the moment because the computer is broken, but you still don't want to sacrifice the hundreds or thousands of photographs that are on that hard drive, stranded there. So, these things made of plastic and metal and rare earth elements just, they pile up in our living spaces. Maybe you're not like that. I come from a long line of hoarders. But my current laptop computer, it's an Asus Republic of Gamers. I don't know the full serial number, but I got it in 2015, and it cost me about $1,200. If I wanted to replace it, just get the exact same thing again, I could buy it on Amazon, but I'm shocked. I went to Amazon to see what it would cost to replace my $1,200 5-year-old computer. It would cost $1,500 for the exact same machine. For the couple decades prior to that, that would have been an absurd situation. The idea for so long, like for most of my adult life, was you spend X number of dollars, say $1,000 on a computer, you keep it for 2 or 3 years, and then you replace it for another computer which costs the same amount of money, but which is an order of magnitude more powerful, gives you much better performance for the amount of money that you spent. And that just doesn't seem to be the case anymore. The idea that, if I were to select not a replacement, an exact replacement for this computer, but just, the best computer that I could get for the money, today, I would be selecting from the same basic choices that I selected from 5 years ago. Do I want to really shell out a bunch of money and get a chip or get an i7 processor, or would an i5 be good enough? It just seems like because the pace of improvements has slowed down, at least in terms of, raw horsepower, computational price performance, because things aren't improving nearly as quickly as they used to, and the amount of computing power that you can buy for $1 isn't dramatically increasing like it used to, then I think we're getting to a place where there will be more thought given to maybe this appliance that I'm buying will be with me for longer than a couple of years. Maybe I'll have it for a decade or more. And when that becomes the case, and we're not constantly churning through, always buying new electronics, then the environmental damage that, our addiction to these things produces will be lessened. But, just the mining and the like rare earths that come from conflict zones and all the damage, all the harm that is sort of produced as collateral damage on the way to getting you your shiny new machine. There's more, there's more harm that comes from our internet addiction than just that. A lot of it is personal, it is cognitive, it is developmental. I grew up in the pre-internet era, riding my bike all over the place at a young age. I was one of those, raised by wolves, latchkey Gen X kids. And that was a really rewarding childhood. And I think of the childhood that my kids have experienced, mainly sitting, staring at screens. It just seems really, really impoverished. I know they wouldn't trade it for anything. And right now, this coronavirus lockdown is like, they're like pigs in shit. This is heaven to them. No expectation that they should ever leave their home and have to do anything other than look at screens. But from my perspective, it is an impoverished way to grow up. And I think, growing up, doing physical things out in the real world, particularly out in nature, which is to say, non-developed spaces, it was just really rewarding. It is something that I value about my childhood, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Now, when I was riding my bikes all over the place and getting into mischief, I was not out planting gardens, and I was not out regenerating the earth. I mean, this is just, from a quality of life perspective is all I'm talking about here. But what are some of the other things? What are some of the other harms? Well, a great amount of electricity goes into powering server farms. If those server farms didn't exist because we just abandoned that technology, collectively we abandoned that technology, well, that would probably be a benefit. Would it make up for the lack of our ability to coordinate our efforts and share workable solutions? I don't know. I just don't know. But I do know that if we, instead of abandoning the internet, instead of abandoning, this tool which facilitates collaboration and exchange of ideas and exchange of, workable methodologies, instead of walking away from this, what if we walked away from capitalism? What would happen to those server farms if the purpose of the internet wasn't to sell you shit, wasn't to try to generate new economic activity? What if all the bots that were just collecting data on you to build profiles to sell to advertisers, what if all of that went away? How much would the power needs to power the internet diminish? My guess is that it would diminish considerably. But now here's the part that's going to get me in trouble, particularly with this crew, the crew that is worried about, Earth regeneration. I personally don't think the Earth is in trouble. I think the project of global human technological civilization is in danger. I don't think that its demise is assured, and I think if there is a big crash, I don't think it will be permanent. But in terms of, say, loss of species, there have been multiple mass extinction events on this planet in the past, most of them occurring long before human beings ever set foot on the scene. So, for the human haters out there, most mass extinction events were not human caused. And what happens in a relatively brief period after a mass extinction event is that there's a proliferation of new species to fill the vacant ecological gaps, the niches which have been left unfilled or which have been vacated by the mass extinction event. It's happened again and again and again, and I have no doubt that it would happen once more. If humans completely wreck the planet and cause a huge die-off of most species, including ourselves, I think within a few 100 million years, we would have, not we, because we would be gone, but the Earth would have produced another, very diverse, vibrant ecosystem of interacting, interdependent, but also competing organisms. So I'm actually not worried, in the long run on that scale. I would like to preserve the biodiversity that's on the planet right now for the benefit of humanity. We would diminish our own experience if we failed to preserve the biodiversity that exists right now. And now, even worse than that. I mean, that's not a very eco-friendly message, I think, in the minds of most people. Even worse than that, I remember a rap from Terence McKenna, where he theorized, or it's not a theory, he imagined that Gaia, because he didn't talk about God or Mother Nature or the Earth, but he could bring himself to talk about Gaia, that human beings are Gaia's way of creating an upgraded nervous system, global nervous system for herself, of taking, the metals, the copper, the silver, the gold, the rare earth stuff like neodymium, mining that, getting it out of the ground and reformulating it into something that performs a function. Now, the Earth already has a nervous system of sorts. There's a way to transfer information around the planet without any human-made technology. There's basically a microbial or bacteriological internet. Bacteria can exchange packets of genetic information, and they can make it, a packet of information passed around that way can make it to the other side of the planet in a few days, I'm told. But the sorts of information that that sort of bacteriological transfer conveys, it's surely limited in its scope. And using, fiber optics and satellites and long trunk lines and cell towers and, increasingly perhaps local mesh networks, things like this, allow for full stream video, text, sound, all manner, like HTML, not just information, but information about how that information should be formatted and presented. It allows this stuff to fly around the world at enormous speeds and allows people from around the world to collaborate with one another to create information structures which, have real-world impacts, which are not just limited to this abstract domain, but which help us better manipulate the material world in a way which is less destructive, less invasive, less intrusive than our current methods. And Terence McKenna said, and it would take me forever. I mean, I would love to drop in a clip of Terence McKenna here, but it would take me forever to find this because the library of his talks is so enormous, and I don't remember which one this came in. But I remember him saying something to the effect of, Gaia has put every redwood tree and blue whale on notice, saying that this project of upgrading the global nervous system via the agency of these monkeys and their industrial activity is so important that I'm willing to sacrifice you. Squishy biological things, marvelous as you are, I can make more. This project is important to me. And I think that's the thing that would probably insult a lot of the people whose tweets I was just reading. They would probably find that offensive. The idea that, the human project of building information infrastructure which spans the globe is more important than preserving biodiversity. I think they would be really offended at that idea. But it's one that I can't dismiss. I take it seriously. So I'll just loop back to what I've discovered is my main point in this whole thing. I think we do a lot better to abandon capitalism than to abandon the internet. I think we would do better to abandon the profit motive than to give up the utility of some of our most amazing tools. And that much of the harm that those tools create is created in the service of seeking profit or, trying to set up some person, group, or agency in the role of rent collector. And yes, I've seen the footage of children in Africa doing hard manual labor in order to source, rare earth elements for electronics. It's gross. But I maintain that it is the economic system which provides the perverse incentive which leads to those sorts of abusive situations, not the technology itself, and not the goal of allowing people the world over to communicate with one another easily and to collaborate on projects. I think that is amazing, and I want that to continue. All right, that is all. I will talk to you again later. Stay well.